Hello, welcome. As we let this waterfall, people roll in, just take a moment to listen to some nice bird calls. Maybe if, like me, you've been at a computer all day or had a really busy day, maybe we could just take a second to take a big collected deep breath in and let it all out and join each other in this beautiful space. Okay, I'm going to dive right in. Welcome to everybody. So I can say hello, bonjour, hola, wait, and Kapiniskus. Hello, everyone. My name's Jade.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks. Nice to hear people. I'm Jade. I'm part of the team at the Outdoor Learning Store. So we're a North American-wide charitable social enterprise that offers outdoor learning equipment, tools, and resources for educators and learners. And we're working hard to support other educational nonprofits do the work that they do. We're a proud partner with Take Me Outside to deliver this workshop today. So I join you from the traditional and unceded territories of the Swinehart First Nation, the people of the bull trout. And this is a place that's also been known, loved, cherished, stewarded, fished, hunted, travelled with and connected to by the Secwepemc Shuswap Lakes people, the Okanagan Silks and the Tanaha First Nations to the east. And where I am is Kitanmitak Mishkakis, the home of the chickadees. And I see them outside my window every day. That's in Tanaha. I live right along the banks of the Columbia River, which the Tanaha call the Mishkakis River as well. And so as an uninvited guest and a non-Indigenous person living here, I just wanted to take a moment to share my gratitude for being able to be here. If you are with us on Turtle Island or North America, we believe that land-based learning must honour the traditional knowledge of the Indigenous people who've lived here for millennia, since time immemorial. So we ask now, if you do have the knowledge, if you could please share in the chat what Indigenous territory you're joining us from. If you're living on traditional and unceded territory and you don't know whose land it is, you can visit native-land.ca. It's a bit of kit that's been put together, but it actually covers the entire globe. And you can use this as a starting point to learn more about the Indigenous populations of the place where you are. So land acknowledgements for us are not a like checkbox. It is a starting point to know what's going on, who's there, and then start to build relationships with your local Indigenous First Nations or native groups. Over to you, Steph.
Thanks, Jade. And even though you turned off the bird noises, I can still hear some from where I am, which I feel really happy about. I am the program coordinator for Take Me Outside, and I'm representing this organization, but also our 70 plus amazing number of outdoor learning partners. And so we're so excited to be here this evening and presenting to new and familiar faces here. It's nice to see some folks on with their cameras on. I'm joining in from Coast Salish territory on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. It's where the Cowichan tribes, the Quatsin people, and the Hulkaminam speaking people have been living and stewarding this land since time immemorial. And the Cowichan itself, it comes from the name Coatsin, which comes from a Hulkaminam word, which means to warm one's back in the sun, which represents the whole valley in which I live. And right now the sun is coming. I've closed my blinds a little bit because I know it looks better on video, but the sun is coming through my blinds right now, and I'm so happy about that. So I hope that you're finding some lovely moments wherever you're calling in from today.
Thanks, Steph. So welcome everyone. If you haven't been with us before, these are the virtual outdoor learning workshop series, and we hope that these are a place of partnership, growth, caring and sharing. So please get involved in the chat. If you have any resources or things to support, you can pop them in there. We just want to thank you so much for taking this time to join us, to join our experts, and to build a community of practice that supports in getting people outside more. So for those of you just joining Zoom 101, yes, connect in the chat. Please also, if you have any Q&A that you'd like to post to Tim, please post those into the chat, and Steph is going to be beavering behind the scenes to collect them, and then I'll pose them to Tim at the end of his presentation. Please stay muted, but leave your video on if you can, because it's nice to present to people's faces. If you need closed captions, if you have any hearing impairment, they have been enabled. You can hit the more button at the bottom with 3 dots and click captions, and that will go across your screen if they're helpful to you. We're going to have the presentation. I'm going to do a quick intro, then Tim's going to do his thing, Q&A at the end, and then prizes right at the end. So please stay to the end for our usual trivia quiz to win some fun prizes from the Outdoor Learning Store and take me outside. You'll get access to the recording, a discount code, and a link that will enable you to access your certificate of attendance shortly after the workshop. So you should get a follow-up email. So you'll find the links in there, especially if you're looking for your certificate, someone asked me. The link is in your follow-up email. If you don't see it by tomorrow, please check your spam because it might be hiding in there. Okay, so I've already asked you about your traditional acknowledgement, which I'm really grateful for those who shared. Thank you so much for making that effort. But I'm going to ask you from a more global colonial perspective, perhaps, where are you joining us from? There's only limited spaces, so I'm really sorry. I've split sort of North America quite detailed. Elsewhere on this planet, it just gets one. Please type in the chat if you are joining us. I did see someone from Australia who's living in the future because it's tomorrow there right now. So welcome to you. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to leave it open just for 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to end that poll and share the results with you. So we've got some people from up north, and then all of the compass points. Nobody's here from Mexico at the moment, but fantastic that some people are joining us from around the world. And my last question for you in this moment is, who are you? And I mean that in a sort of educational sense. We believe that educator is a really broad term and that everyone is educating someone at some point. But are you a more formal educator in particular grades? Are you an admin or support person? Are you a bit of an informal community educator, educating at home, or none of the above, but just passionate? We've got some passionate people. I'm going to wait 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's have a look. And would you looky here? We have got someone from every single cohort or demographic. It's just fantastic to see the diversity of people. Outdoor learning is for everyone. We're so glad you're here. And so let's just dive into all of the fun. And I'm just going to do a really quick intro to welcome you to the Outdoor Learning Winter Virtual Workshop Series. This is our penultimate series in this workshop. It is a People's Curriculum for the Earth. It's the 28th of February today. I just want to share that we have some amazing partners. These are our international partners doing great work. If you go to the link that's coming into the chat box now, you can find amazing resources as connections. These are our US partners. Some Canadian partners for you. And some more of those. Amazing resources for you. We hope you connect. I've got a little fantastic free professional development workshops. If after the spring series is winter series is finished, before we hit the spring series, you're like, oh, I'm just desperate. I've connected with Dr. Gillian Judson, who wrote the Walking Curriculum and Engaging Imagination in Ecological Education. We're going to do 3 weeks leading up to Earth Day of self-paced but supported learning on sort of walking curriculum. And then there's 3 live webinars with Dr. Gillian Judson herself, absolute genius, to connect you into these amazing ways of cognitive tools to do with imagination in your teaching. Oh, you're here, Gillian. Hello. We're really excited to share it with you. It's entirely free. And it's just a great way to get a little daily prompt to take out with you that day. You won't need anything special to be able to deliver it with your class. So we hope to see you there for that as well. outdoorlearningstore.com/springtips. You can register there and learn more about the instructors. But now for the main event. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be talking today about a People's Curriculum for the Earth. Bill Bigelow and Tim Swinehart, who's obviously here today. So Tim is a high school teacher, social studies teacher, and the co-author of the book. And if you haven't read it, it's an amazing way to really connect with such diverse issues around the environment and people. There's the best articles from Rethinking Schools magazine. things on climate change, water, food and pollution, and some focus on some cool people who are working to do things better. And so I will stop my share. I will pass it over to you, Tim, and say welcome to the floor. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jade. And what an incredible opportunity to be here with so many people. I'm kind of blown away. I'm not sure how you all do your outreach, but I'm really impressed. So many of our Rethinking Schools workshops, we struggle to fill up like one of these Zoom screens, and I now have 7, it looks like. So that's just really, really great. And I really appreciate folks being here and having the chance to talk today. Let me go ahead and pull up my slideshow. And we'll start
just
there.
So you know, while you're getting it going, it's our network. It's the community of people who are passionate, and it's amazing. So we're so glad you're all here.
Yeah, me too. Okay, well, so like Jade said, I'm going to talk a little bit about this book that I got the chance to work on, People's Curriculum for the Earth, almost 10 years ago now, and then also talk a bit about some of the teaching that I have done over the last few years, and kind of how the work that I've done towards teaching for climate justice and student action, and hope that can apply a little bit to some of the themes around outdoor education that will hopefully come up too. A quick note about this land acknowledgement. Just because it connects to this workshop today, I was invited to speak at the ECOM Environmental Education Conference in Saskatoon, 2018, maybe 2019, and I was blown away at every single event I went to in Saskatoon started with a land acknowledgement, and they had not become, they're just barely becoming commonplace in places like Portland in the States. And so y'all are quite a ways ahead of us when it comes to that. But I came back from that trip and wanted to incorporate that into my teaching. And so I started teaching the writing of land acknowledgements in my geography class. And so this comes from some of my students at Lincoln High School who wrote this last year. And I'll give credit to them. It's Lark, Redding, Sophia, and Dylan. And they wrote, after doing some research and then working as a group, we acknowledge that we are presently occupying the traditional lands of the Multnomah, Kathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Willamette and Columbia rivers. By this occupation, we recognize that we are actively benefiting from the erasure and oppression of Indigenous peoples. Due to the Kalapuya Treaty of 1855, Western Oregon Termination Act, Klamath Termination Act, as well as settler-brought disease, Indigenous peoples have been repeatedly forcibly removed from their homes and lands which we now live on. While enduring the lasting effects of colonization, the Indigenous community in Oregon has stayed resilient. Through cultural restoration and traditional practices, Indigenous culture has survived for thousands of years. In Portland alone, we have the 9th largest Native population with 380 tribes represented and are home to over 20 Native-led organizations. We recognize that Indigenous people are the past, present, and future of this land. Do not make reading this acknowledgement a performative act. We encourage you to continue educating yourself and fighting for justice for the Indigenous peoples of Oregon. Okay, so thanks to those students for their work on that. So I come to you today as a high school social studies teacher, and as we were chatting a little bit before the call, I really wish that I spent more time outside with my students, and it may actually be something that I'm kind of working towards at this point in my career. But I have spent most of my 20 years in a classroom as a social studies teacher, both at Lincoln and as well as an instructor in the Lewis and Clark Graduate School of Education here in Portland. Served for many years on the Portland Public Schools Climate Justice Committee. And I can share, maybe I'll try to share a link, or we can share a link to this slideshow, because there are a couple of links in here in case folks are interested. And then the reason for being here today, co-editor of A People's Curriculum for the Earth. So a little bit about how People's Curriculum for the Earth, I think, kind of fits with, you know, what I imagine to be some of the more I'm going to use the word traditional, but sometimes that I'm not meaning to use that in any way that means lesser than, but yeah, I guess the kind of standard traditional of what I would think of anyway as a non-practitioner, maybe I'll put it that way, of outdoor and place-based learning. You know, and we have a whole chapter actually in the book that's written by teachers, by really most of the articles in the book that do come, as Jade mentioned, from Rethinking Schools magazine, are written by teachers for teachers. That's really kind of the model that we follow. You know, so there's the Pedagogy for Ecology by Ann Pello is kind of like a preschool approach to walking neighborhoods, walking the land, and developing relationships with really young kids. A really beautiful piece. Teachers who are, you know, are kind of working in the urban landscape to try to get kids out, connecting, you know, through various walking field trips and research projects on, you know, local history and confronting some of the various environmental challenges that they might find in their neighborhood. Mark Hansen's is a great example of that here in Portland. And then the one that I put on the right side of the screen is just this really wonderful article from Hardy Thames about working with his students in Mississippi who are researching the relationship between kind of hinting at one of the themes that I want to talk about today, which is how you know, the important ways that social justice and racial justice can make their way into the environmental education that we do, and how I think, you know, those themes are really connected in important ways, and looking at how the development from a predominantly white community in Mississippi has impacted a nearby historically freed Black. It was a farming community, and just really the kind of the learning that happens there, and a lot of it outside is just a really wonderful story. So, you know, we have there are kind of those sorts of pieces in the book. And then there's, you know, there's also kind of thought pieces, or, you know, in this case, what I said, there's sort of like in defense of a nature-based curriculum. And so these, you know, these two pieces, Bill, my co-editor, and one that I wrote, are not necessarily about taking kids outside, but it's really looking at the curriculum, you know, and maybe I'm preaching to the choir here at an outdoor learning workshop, but, you know, the way in which there is a hidden curriculum in schools that can actually be, even though it's not explicitly anti-nature, that really ends up being the result, you know. And Bill just tells this wonderful story of kind of how growing up where he did in Northern California, and how the lack of connection to the place where he lived, as he says, taught him contempt for the earth. And this is the piece that I know has been used by teacher educators across the country to kind of big success in just kind of probing questions around how our school system is set up today, and how we probably need to be changing it to in pretty drastic ways, to be addressing the environmental crises that we face, and, you know, to be nurturing stronger relationships with the places that we live with our students, and kind of, you know, similar thing with the piece that I wrote that's here. There's another thing that the book tries to do along with those, and and this is where I'll kind of pivot a little bit in terms of what I'm talking about, and it's really and my hope is that there are pieces of what we bring to I guess environmental education, if you will, as social studies and social justice teachers, that I think should apply as well to outdoor learning. But that it's this kind of idea that we need to, in this moment that we live in, what I see more and more post-pandemic, and the sort of annual wildfires that we experience, all up and down well, not just the West Coast, so many places, but certainly in places like Oregon, Washington, California, British Columbia. Our students are living this now, right? 10, 15 years ago when I was teaching about the climate crisis, it was something that happened someplace else, right? I mean, not really, but like that was the perception of students. And that's just not true anymore. And so, I think that we just have this real responsibility to find that all of the teaching that we do about environmental issues, about the climate crisis, it has to be nurturing, a hopeful approach, and really, I would argue, an activist approach to how we deal with this moment that we live in, and that it's really empowering, for students. And so that's one of the reasons why we focused on social movements and telling the stories of people from across North America and around the world who, most generally being in places and communities that are most affected by the climate crisis, are also the ones who are surfacing, some of the most important solutions and sort of community building actions, towards creating the world that we want, right? The world that our students want. And so examples like La Via Campesina, the Indigenous Peoples Global Summit on Climate Change, these are activities that we wrote to really tell those stories and engage kids in the stories of various actors who are just like doing really, really good work, and that don't show up anywhere in the rest of the curriculum. And I think that's another thing that was really important to us in surfacing these stories, is that, there are more and more often, there are climate change standards, right, that are showing up. And sometimes I think we've checked the climate curriculum box if we have science standards, and the next generation science standards here in the US. And so we, will oftentimes say, okay, we're doing climate education. And I'm not convinced that we are. I think that that's important. I think that scientific knowledge is really important. But if that's all that we're giving kids, and we're not bringing these stories of activism, of community response, of social movements, I think that that our curriculum and our approach to teaching about environmental issues is going to continue to be lacking, and not be giving kids what they need at this moment in time. So one other resource I wanted to make sure to share, along with the book, and this is free. It's the Teach Climate Justice campaign or project at the Zen Education Project. And granted, Zen Education is largely sort of a US history through a social justice, racial justice lens. And, so in that sense, it is it's a bit US centric. But the climate justice campaign at the Zen Education Project is very global in its scope and the activities that are there. And so, as a couple examples here, Blockadia has one of the stories that's part of that activity is the Beaver Lake Cree in Canada, and their campaign against tar sands extraction. And then one other activity that I wanted to that I worked on with a colleague at Lincoln, this Meet Today's Climate Justice Activists, is one that I think I've heard has been used in lots of different settings, from classroom settings, but also in informal settings as well, with adults, with students in more informal settings, and so it's one that I would would recommend folks to check out, again, the Zen Education Project. And the idea here is, and this is one of the themes sort of that I'm talking about today, is just bringing these stories of folks in their communities that are responding to this moment that we are in, to the climate crisis, and to making connections between environmental issues and other social justice issues, and doing it in a lot of ways that we don't anticipate. So we have artists in here as climate activists. We have farmers in here as climate activists, youth activists, indigenous justice activists, and just a lot of really kind of wonderful stories that come together in this activity. And so yeah, I would encourage people to check that out, the Zen Ed Project. And it's all, once you register, this stuff's all free and available, because it's how we want to get it out into the world. So and I just wanted to just kind of pivot, I guess, a little bit one more time, or just continue with this theme of because it's been such a big part of my career, and kind of what in a way, like what students have led me to as a teacher. I would say that so much of my teaching has been directed by what my students have brought and have asked for. And so this is back in 2018 when Scott Morrison in Australia said we need more learning in schools and less activism. And it's funny because that was, it's a little bit after, but I kind of had the opposite thing happen. And so when we passed the climate justice resolution in Portland Public Schools in 2016, and it was the first climate policy in a major school district in the US of its kind, and the students were active in that campaign. And so some of my students at Lincoln came up afterwards and said, hey, we have this school policy now. Can we have an environmental activism class at Lincoln? And I thought, well, why can't we, right? And so we went and talked to our principal, who was supportive. And so we started the district's first environmental justice class, which again, just kind of grew out of what, students were expressing in terms of what they needed. And it's transformed the work that I have been able to do as a teacher, and the opportunities that have come up, and kind of what I see, education, sort of what the possibilities, even within the constraints of classroom education, what that can look like, and so this is about as close, I guess I was just trying to stick with the outdoor learning theme. This is like as close as I've gotten as some of these stories as I just wanted to share here real briefly to outdoor learning with my students. It's the kind of some of these field trips and things that we get to do outside of the walls of the classroom. So from, and I guess the other thing that I was just going to make a point of too is that most all of this has been done in collaboration with people in our community. And so I do really believe that there, and again, probably so many of you are doing this work already. But I would say that not a lot of classroom-based education, at least in the US, looks like this, where there are these really kind of fundamental collaborations between things happening in schools and community. And so this was with one of the climate justice organizations in Portland 350 PDX, and we had a chance to give students were giving testimony, and went down and delivered that and sang a song to the mayor, and then who said that actually that ended up playing an important role in Portland passing some of the strictest fossil fuel ban on future fossil fuel infrastructure in Portland. And it also has looked like partnering with other community organizations to go to the Capitol, and in this case, Neighbors for Clean Air, another organization I've had a chance to work with. And I just, when I can, I like to share this short clip. This is one of my environmental justice students, Julia, who for her final had written this poem. One thing that I guess I would urge you to listen to here is the way in which she tells stories through this poem. And that is something that I think is really fundamental as well to the kind of climate and environmental education that we really need these days. And Governor Brown didn't really ask for this to happen, but Julia knew she wanted to. And so she read this poem, and I just wanted to play you a short clip. And Jade, if you don't say anything, I'll assume that the sound is working okay.
Of Hurricane Katrina, and says we need to wake up. Because Hurricanes Harvey and Irma are in far too many headlines to ignore. Because there's flooding in Texas, Florida, Long Island, Puerto Rico. Because in Houston, water drips from broken ceilings like tears. Because in Syria, the only water is the tears streaming down refugees' faces as they are forced to leave their home, the result of a drought-induced civil war. Because Hurricane Katrina was over 10 years ago, and people are still forced to choose whether to rebuild or retreat, because I am reminded that choice is a privilege. Naomi Klein states the scientific facts of climate change allow one to choose how they will react, and many still insist on blatantly disregarding these facts. In 2017, Trump states that climate change research is a waste of money. Trump, I urge you to tell that to Mika Mayava, who wakes up every morning to realize the shoreline of the island he calls home is consistently receding. Tell that to Feifei, a young girl in Beijing who can't leave her house without a pollution mask. Tell that to Danielle, who lives in fear of the Pacific Connector pipeline destroying the river that runs near her home, the river that is her everything. Because we need to wake up. The US pulls out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Wake up. Media commentators speak of compassion fatigue. Since when does compassion have a limit? Wake up. An anti-environmental politician pounds his fist on a table. It shakes. The whole world shakes. Wake up. Because we won't rest until ash ceases to swirl in the sky like raindrops, until the only water rushing is glistening through streams, waterfalls, rivers, oceans, until we shift from caring about paychecks to caring about people. Until we can see empathy, dripping like honey, swinging from trees, spreading like ice in the Arctic, until we can lay on the earth and let compassion encircle us like a blanket of blue sky.
Wow. That's fabulous. Can you get a copy?
Yeah,
Can you get a copy?
Take
That'd
this
be
one
great.
if you want. Yeah.
Thank you. So
I still get choked up listening to that. Yeah, you know, I think, like I said, I'm just really moved by how, you know, curriculum that is like, it makes space for students to do this kind of writing, to tell these kind of stories, and then creates the opportunities, you know, for this kind of thing to happen. And I just, like I said, it's been really transformative for me as a teacher to kind of see what this, and because I'm not being encouraged to do this by my school district, by my state board of education. In fact, I would say maybe the opposite, you know, and so we have sort of constantly sort of pushed against those parameters and kind of what is suggested that education should look like to do some of these, to take some of these other approaches. And you know, I continue to hear back from students as they move on through college and into other things, just, you know, who stay in touch and say, gosh, this really, having this opportunity really was really important to me as a high school student. So, so yeah, just I'm close to being done because I know we want to have time for questions, but just a couple other examples here that again, you know, are a little different probably than the kind of place-based, you know, nature-based learning. But, you know, but again, I would make an argument that we need to find the wounds in the areas where we live as well. And this, you know, this picture on the left is a massive wound in our ecology here in Portland next to the Willamette River. And we have this beautiful, we have the largest urban park in the country just to the left of all these fossil fuel tanks. You can't see it, but Forest Park is, well, you can behind the train car there, actually, that the students are in front of. Beautiful, you know, beautiful giant forested park. And then there's 95% of Oregon's fossil fuel infrastructure that has been built in what was once a wetland, just a short 100 years ago. And so there's all these stories just in this area, and this is actually in our school boundary. And we have we've taken field trips here. My classes the last few years, we get on a school field, a school bus, and ride down there, and it stinks and it burns your throat, but it's also, I think, really powerful to be down there and kind of immersed in this, and then talk about what does it look like to then meet with activists from the Braided River Campaign and the Portland Harbor Community Coalition and see what people are doing in their responses to these places. It's also looked like organizing, and when the student climate strikes were really, just kind of blowing up in 2019, our classroom became a bit of an organizing hub with Sunrise PDX, and students were, my students, I sort of stepped back and just, offered support when I could, but they got to play a really key role in organizing one of the citywide climate strikes in December 2019. And again, that was just a pretty incredible opportunity. Pandemic hit and nothing happened for 2 years. And so then these last couple years, Duncan was asking, what's it been like teaching this year, last year? And it's taken a lot of intentional kind of rebuilding of the capacity for students to see themselves as organizers. And, I think that some of that was lost, not all of it, but, some of it was lost over the course of the pandemic. And so it's really taken work to to rebuild that. And, I think that'll be work that we continue to do as educators for the next few years, really, to help facilitate that. Here's something that looks more like outdoor learning. This is my brother-in-law's farm. So invite students to come up there. We've been reading Braiding Sweetgrass, a wonderful resource if folks are not familiar with Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, and kind of connecting some of the stories that she tells about traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous ways of learning to some of the farming that my brother-in-law does, actually on the piece of property that I grew up on. That's 5 acres that I ran. It was a hayfield when I was young, and remember being able to run as far as I could with hay that was up to my neck. And now it grows food for 100 families, which is really cool. So that's kind of a neat opportunity to take kids up there. Just a couple more slides here, again, kind of with the Braided River Campaign, visiting some of these fossil fuel areas, and then learning about what people are doing in response. Environmental education is art. Students last year decided to take this knowledge that they had and to turn it into an art exhibit for the other 1,500 students in our school. And so that storyboard that you can see across the back wall tells the story of the Willamette River kind of through, pre-colonization, all the way through the sort of the creation of the fossil fuel infrastructure and Superfund site, and then what the future can look like, a future of restoration. And so, that it can just look like a lot of different things. So I think this was my last slide here with just a few of the themes that I've been trying to talk about, just make sure that I hit them, but just kind of, again, lessons that I've taken from this work that I've been so privileged to be able to do with these incredible young people, but just that, we really need to be centering activism and empowerment in the environmental education that we do. That it, needs, again, folks here, I think, understand that this needs to be multidisciplinary. And so, this can't just happen in science class, right? It needs to happen in so many places. We need to be constantly always centering the stories of BIPOC frontline communities, not only because of the way in which the extractive economy has marginalized these communities, but, as I really try to center in my classes, because these are usually the communities that are also leading the way that we should be heading, right, into this kind of just regenerative economy. And then finally, that that the way that we teach should mirror the world that we want to build. I don't know that there are some examples maybe that I didn't include just for brevity here today, but in terms of the way that I do this, but but just like especially after these last few years, right? We need to be centering joy and community and love as much as we can in our teaching and the various spaces that we're doing that in. So okay, I'll pause or kind of stop there so that we can move into the next part of this.
Thank you, Tim. So excellent and so empowering to see your students delivering their feelings and their desires and their thoughts in the way that you're supporting them to and encouraging them to. So that's really beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Talking of that, the first question, everyone else send your questions in, type them in the chat. If you have anything you'd like to share with Tim. Lee asked, is there a link to that video of your student's poem? Could you share that with us if it's possible? Because Lee would love to share it with their students.
Yeah, I promised that I think I should. I shared the slideshow with you, but I can also just let me grab, because I did change the sharing on the slideshow so that anybody can access it. So then I'll just come back here to the chat and hopefully maybe somebody could, whoops, that just went to Andrea. Let me get to everyone and we'll try that again. Okay.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so maybe somebody could try that and make sure, but then that everything that was in the slideshow there should be available to you.
Thank you, Tim. Pam asked, how has participating in social climate justice work built social interactions among your students? They've noticed that students' social skills have taken a real hit during COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the work, there were a couple of key lessons, particularly like in my environmental justice class that I didn't include in this slideshow, but that I think helped to build up to that. But one is an assignment to have students write their environmental autobiography. And that's what we do during the first week. And, it's similar, I think, to what a lot of teachers and educators do in different settings, right? But it's, it's just asking students to tell a story of a time that they felt particularly connected to nature, or that they sort of saw a rupture, in nature, or that they wanted to be part of the environmental justice movement, different kind of ways into it. But they, it's a personal narrative. And then we spend the first couple of weeks of class in a circle, just going around and sharing those stories and listening with an open heart and offering lots of feedback and love after other students share. And, so I think that sort of building that foundation then into these other opportunities, I think, I think it does. I think there are some pretty important social skills. We just went actually like a week ago back down to Salem with Neighbors for Clean Air, and it was pretty cool to see some of my students who said they had never. Well, it's that student who's like, I've never done a testimony before. I haven't done this in like talk to someone who feels like they're kind of in a position of power. And, he stepped up and did a great job and was really proud of himself afterwards. And, and so, I mean, that was just a small example, but I think, I think we do have to be really aware of those, I think there's been this huge focus on like the sort of learning loss in COVID, which is fine. But to me, it's kind of like, how have standardized test scores dropped, and just some of the stuff that I don't really believe are showing us that we're being that successful with education in the first place, and I think it's some of these other things that we actually really need to be building back up. It is the social skills. It is helping kids, relearn to be in community with one another. So yeah, I appreciate that question.
Beautiful. It sounds like you're doing it. And for me, like you said, in the classroom a lot, I do a lot of circle time outside, even if it's just for 10 minutes for that discussion piece and noise doesn't bounce off walls. Another thing, if you've maybe got slightly younger students, I've been doing lots of debates, about energy debates, and then they have to collaborate with their team members to do their research. They have to learn to have responsive communications back and forth that are reasoned and without emotion. So there's a space for the emotion and sharing their personal feelings, and then a space where they can do things in a more sort of restricted or needing to meet a certain audience. And I think a lot of the resources in the book share about that. Okay, they're coming in now. Okay, I've got Jennifer, Laura, Ruth Ann, and Jessica as well sharing. Do you have any parent pushback on these field trips or topics? How do you deal with opposition to scientifically accepted ideas? Are you having any pushback about activism? Sometimes they're seeing a loud but small minority of parents or community members squashing that. And have you ever dealt with climate change deniers on your school board? I feel like those are kind of all lumped in with this thing. And I've had this question too. What's your...
I think there's, one is just recognizing that we all live and teach in in unique places, right? And so my approach, obviously, in Portland, Oregon, is going to be different. There are things that I can take for granted here that somebody in Eastern Oregon, for example, across the mountains, where it's much it's more rural, much more conservative, right? But I guess there's a couple things. So to come back to the book, I think that early on, when we were working on some of this curriculum, I think that I was more likely to see climate denial showing up in my classroom in Portland. That just, in all honesty, it just doesn't happen that much these days. But I think that one of the things actually that I realized, I think Bill and I talked about early on, is that maybe this is my bias as a social studies teacher, but I found that I actually, it wasn't effective, and I didn't really want to get into scientific debates with students. I'm still actually not convinced that the sort of the science, the idea that the science will shine light on the truth, and that we'll all sort of then figure out how to solve this together. Again, I come at this with a particular bias, but for me, it's the stories of people that I find really, get into the hearts of my students. And that, I can remember earlier on that asking, a student who, thought that he was at home, he was listening to Fox News, he was hearing climate denial, from, he was actually ready to kind of, quote, debate the science. But when he had to take on the persona of someone in the Marshall Islands and, and sort of talk through well, here's what it looks like, to view this issue from this perspective. It was like it was like a different student talking, and so I think the stories, human stories are one, and also stories of, of animals and trees, and stories from the natural world too, right? Again, I think of Robin Wall Kimmerer and braiding sweetgrass, but I guess that's one approach that I think about with pushback, I guess. With the activism piece, again, different needs, different values in different communities, but having communicated with educators, across the country in various communities, in conservative communities, one thing that seems to resonate is that there are students everywhere who are asking for this kind of education, right? There are students in conservative communities that want to be able to, they want the same sort of empowerment, right, through their education. And so I think that one thing is just sort of like turning it around so that we're talking about meeting the needs of our students instead of imposing some kind of like political agenda or something, I feel like that's what it's always been for me. I've just been responding to what my students are showing up with and what they need. And I think that's really fundamentally like what we should always be doing as teachers.
Did you have to get any permission from your school level administration to do sort of like a climate rally or participate in that sort of thing?
Well, that's where it's unique. I didn't read the language of that policy that we passed in 2016, but part of it says that it is the mission of Portland Public Schools to help students come to see themselves as activists for social and environmental justice. So, that's school policy where I teach. And so I have that sort of wind at my sails, if you will. And I know that is not school policy in most places. So I have not had to, but again, I think there are examples of teachers who have, students are doing this organizing, right? So, Sunrise, nationally, like the Sunrise organization started as college students and people in their 20s, and it's now largely led by high school students all across the United States, for example. So young people are coming to this all on their own, and I think sometimes actually are quite upset that their schools are not mirroring what they're doing and seeing in their lives. So I
perhaps think if they don't have administrative support, that's got to be student led. They write letters, let them write their needs, and then that can be, very difficult to ignore when it's supposed to be for students, and students say this is actually what we desire.
Right.
Amazing. Thanks so much for sharing. Adrian asked Adrian's from Florida. They're having books and speaking on certain topics banned in their state.
I'm so sorry.
I know. And is asking how you would suggest teaching about environmental climate justice. Adrian, I don't know exactly what topics are being banned. Maybe you can share in the chat, or I'm not aware exactly what that is.
It's a lot. Florida has, again, I don't want to overstep my bounds as someone who's not in Florida, but from the stories I'm hearing, it's sort of becoming, at least the leaders, it's becoming a crucible for like neo-fascism at this point. Like there are educators who are like, anyway, I don't want to go too far into that, but the teachers are worried about having certain books on their shelves. They have to cover them up because people are coming through classrooms, and there are like criminal offenses associated with some of these things that are happening. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Is there some way to connect into
an
informal setting?
What would I suggest? I think I wish there's this wonderful example through I mentioned the Zen Education Project, and they have been doing these nationwide Teaching for Black Lives study groups that are such a great model. And so there's educators from all over that participate in like a book study group, and then connect with people from regionally or nationally. And so I guess I'm trying to think of kind of we're actually hoping to do something like that. We're actually actively working on a second edition of the People's Curriculum for the Earth, and hoping that when that comes out in the next couple of years, that we can do sort of like a national book group model. As far, I guess just, look for, it's that teachers have had to teach through hard times in various places, and I think for many generations, and I think that the calling is to do, and I'm sorry I don't have more specific resources to offer, but to find ways to connect with people in other places that you can find solidarity with, and that you can that can feed you in a way, if you're in a place where that's not immediately what you're finding in your surroundings.
Okay, yeah, tough things that maybe we can't answer in this moment, but yeah, maybe we can look to that in some future programming, in looking. Ruth Ann says about sharing examples of teachers doing what Tim does, but in parts of the country where it's really not accepted. Ruth Ann works with the local tribal community, developing tribal citizen science and Lenape forest gardeners. So they get away with it in a cultural restoration, but they can't do anything like that in the public school system. Right. So let us think on that and ruminate on it. But I'm very sorry for anyone who's being suppressed in their education role. That's really devastating. Okay, there are a couple more questions, but I really want to honor the fact that we want to be able to give people the opportunity to leave right on the hour. So I'm going to say thank you so much for the moment. We're going to do a soft close, the prize giving, and then we're going to come back to a couple more questions for Tim. We'll stay on the line for about 10 minutes afterwards and dive deeper into some of those questions. But again, Tim, thank you so much for your presentation, for being with us. Thank you, everyone, for sharing and bringing your vulnerability to this space. I know that can be a really challenging thing to do in the virtual world. So we're so grateful for all of your questions. Okay, we've just got one workshop left in the winter series. It's school gardening, teaching tools and resources on Tuesday, March 7th with school garden educators Casey Ray Christopher and Megan Zenny. It's as sort of winter is creeping into spring, so we hope that there'll be some amazing things. And it's coming out soon, but if you go on our workshop's website, you might see a sneak preview of our spring lineup, which features some really fantastic educators from very diverse topics and understandings and perspectives. But let's have some prizes. And because we were talking about a people's curriculum for the earth, I've been doing slightly random, weird trivia this time. The theme is people, and sort of almost like medical sort of human body type scenario rather than people in the environment. So anyone who's got a secret medical background, this might be your week to win. It's a typing quiz. So first correct answer gets it. There are no multiple choices today. You have to just know the answer. I believe in you. So if everybody is ready, fingers at the ready. Question 1. Question 1 and 2 are in the running to win a $25 gift card to the Outdoor Learning Store, where you could get Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, or Monique Grace Smith's adaptation for young adults is now in the store, and it is incredible. So many little short talking points and connection pieces. So highly recommend that as well. Or a People's Curriculum for the Earth if you don't have a copy already. Here we go. Question 1. Which organ is responsible for regulating blood sugar level in the body?
All right, wasn't long for that. Jennifer West came up first on my screen with the correct answer, which is pancreas.
Congratulations, Jennifer. If you can private message your email to Steph and let us know whether you are a Canadian or US dollar type person, and we'll make sure we get the right gift card to you. Okay. Question 2, another $25 gift card to the Outdoor Learning Store. Where in the human body might you find the ossicles? Where in the human body would you find the ossicles?
Oh, another quick answer from Jessica Lairier, which
Jessica Lira.
the answer is in the ear. Yeah, congrats.
Yes, also known as the auditory ossicles. They are 3 bones in the middle ear that are among the smallest bones in the human body. They serve to transmit sounds from the air to the fluid-filled labyrinth or cochlea. The absence of auditory ossicles would constitute a moderate to severe hearing loss. So very important bit of kit. Same deal as before, emails to Steph, please, if you can. Okay, the next 2 questions, 2 gift cards. These this time are for the Take Me Outside store, where they have some really beautiful, ethically made fun t-shirts with slogans like "Ask your teacher to take you outside" or "Take me outside," so everybody can go outside. Okay, question 3. Can anybody tell me, and I'm looking for correct spelling here, I'm going to be quite ask for specificity. What is the scientific name for the kneecap? Anyone? Lovely.
Good job, Julia Brown. First up with patella, and I will never forget that one because I had to get surgery on mine. Good job, Julia.
Yeah, so let us know if you're Canadian or US dollars and send your email to Steph. Okay, last question, last chance. Take Me Outside gift card goes to the first person who can tell me what makes up 60 to 70% of human body weight.
Alison Barton, water.
Alison Barton, well done. Congratulations. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll be sending gift cards to you in a follow-up email very shortly. Again, just before you go, you will get a follow-up email with the recording instructions to get your certificate of attendance and links to any resources mentioned in the workshop. Thank you so much for joining us. If you do need to leave on the hour, we totally understand. But if not, we're going to scooch back into a couple more questions here and pick your brain a little more, Tim.
Sounds good.
Andrew asked, he was interested, is the class you teach required that you're taking these students out? Is it like math or science, or is it an elective class?
Yeah, the one that most of those stories came from is an elective. So I do a fair amount of climate and environmental justice teaching as well in the geography class that I teach, which is a class that counts for graduation. But have we done any? We haven't done field trips quite like this. So yeah, it is an elective, but I'm in conversation with some teachers right now at Lincoln to kind of talk about how we can maybe create more of like within the career and technical education path, like how can we create an environmental justice pathway that can include like environmental science and environmental justice, and then maybe some sort of like community activism engagement type class. And so still not sure whether that would be, I mean, it wouldn't be required, but maybe, would there be a way that it could actually count for graduation credit?
Thanks. Anne was asking to clarify, is the People's Curriculum for the Earth an outline of activities with resources, or are there steps to organize some of the activities you shared here? I know the answer, but maybe you could just share a little bit, because it's quite the book.
Yeah, no, that was a great question. It really, the book is much more of a collection of resources, so it is, it's teaching articles, again, written by teachers sort of describing the work that they've done in their classrooms with students related to different types of environmental education. There are like student-friendly readings in the book, probably mostly like at the high school level, and then a lot of activities too. And like, Bill is sort of my co-editor who taught for 30 years and kind of really helped to, in a way, like revolutionize social studies teaching nationally. It's just, he's kind of a master at like writing these activities that, where kids are in, they don't really even recognize that they're involved and having fun and like doing something that's joyful in the classroom and learning really, sort of deeply at the same time. And so, yeah, there are, there's it sounds kind of horrific, but there's like a game where they all play CEOs, and they have to pay attention to like the rising carbon in the atmosphere, and they have to essentially they have to work together to save the planet. But the way the game is set up, they sort of all outbid each other, and because they're all trying to get chocolate. So, and then we run it a second time. We say, well, what if we change the rules? Like, how could you rewrite this? How could you make this work? And so that's just one. That's the thingamabob activity. But
they're
yeah.
really hands-on, though. There's lots of opportunities, and in the book, there are some sort of case studies, or articles like David Suzuki sharing that you can use as a jumping off point. I use them as hooks at the beginning of a class or to stimulate my debate before we dive deeper into a project or a topic. And then, there's some of these really hands-on photocopy this page, print out pieces, give everyone a role, get them interacting and thinking and critically thinking. I think is a big thing for me that I've got from the book, is that it's sharing how to look at where our information comes from for students, because I'm struggling with that with some of my older students, is that they can summarize the information quite well that I give them, but when I ask them, well, who wrote it and what potential bias do they have, they're not really aware of that sometimes. And so really diving into where our information comes from. Anne's asking, can the book be used with a family, or is it just for a classroom?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I remember when it first came out that we, what congregation was it? I want to say Unitarians, just because that just kind of sounds right. But I think it was actually a different congregation that bought hundreds of copies to use in like study groups in churches. And so, could it be used with a family? I like that question. My girls have certainly grown up hearing about a lot of this stuff, as sometimes they'll tell me to just turn it off at the dinner table, but that's
I'd like to interject that I feel like if you aren't having family walks, if that's not a massive part of your family unit, that you should instigate that and have family walks, whether it's with the dog or just even after dinners or on a Saturday morning, and to read one of these articles before you go out there, and to think as you're walking about your place in relation to that. And does it resonate with you? Is it something that you can experience, or is it quite an opposing view, or something that you don't have to worry about where you live if you're living in a very urban environment and they're talking about rural things, or vice versa, and just making your time together, particularly when it's outside, more intentional. So a lot of the work that I'm doing with my family unit, or even with friends, because I don't have kids, is my own kids. I have hundreds of kids that I spend time with, but is that time is intentional and thought-provoking. So just so you know, that's how I use your book.
I love that.
And for homeschoolers, absolutely, Anne. Education is education. There are some amazing homeschool groups that I'm connected with that are absolutely utilizing these kind of resources. And it's these collective pieces. It's having opinion. It's sharing different perspectives or directions or ways of looking at things. I think it's an amazing resource for homeschoolers. Absolutely. Okay. Sorry, I keep stealing your questions. I'm quite passionate about your book. I'm sorry. I think we might have worked our way all the way down, everybody.
I think we might have.
I think it's really tricky, and clearly we haven't been able to really dive deep on if people are really struggling with pushback related to this. And I feel sometimes if you have a more restrictive education system, education over activism is a gateway in of just doing case study work, or just looking and, like you say, focusing on story rather than the background science behind, or just looking at it. But leave it with us and let us work on sharing that with you. And we're so sorry for anybody going through that in your educational world. And we'll come back to you with some more.
Well, and I would just go back to like the one activity that I talked about in the middle of the slideshow too, which is if it's too much of a stretch to kind of, create that space for students to organize, bring the activism into, like bring the stories of activism into your classroom, bring the stories of social movements into your classroom, right? And so whether it's a climate justice activist mixer, and then it's and then and these are people, these are real people doing this work in the world, and it's helping to expose students to that. But it's not asking them, they sort of try on that hat for 15 minutes, right? And then they take it off, and then and they can critique it if they want. You can even like kind of approach it in multiple ways, but it's not asking them to do anything beyond that. But I think that can sometimes plant a seed. So.
And with that, we'll say thank you so much for planting the seeds into so many brains, including my own, in the work. And as we go forward as educators, keep building our community and keep supporting each other in sharing these really important topics with the next generation. Sorry, Christiana, I see your comment. You were told you were too abstract at one point last year. Well, we are going to need abstract thought and thinking outside of the box in order to problem solve for our ever changing and more complex world. So I say congrats to you. I'll take it as a compliment. Thank you, everyone. We'll say goodnight there, and wish you all the best in your outdoor and all your lives. Take care. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, everyone.